I used to think my biggest weakness was insecurity. I was wrong. My biggest weakness was telling the wrong person what I was insecure about. There's something nobody tells you about manipulation. It doesn't always start with control. Sometimes it starts with comfort. Sometimes it starts with someone looking at you like they understand you better than anyone ever has. Like they can see the parts of you that you keep hidden, the parts you're ashamed of, the parts you don't even say out loud. And when that happens, you feel safe. That's how it started for me. Not with threats, not with cruelty, not with obvious red flags. It started with attention. I met them at a time in my life when I was already falling apart in ways nobody could see. From the outside, I looked normal, functional, fine. I still laughed when people expected me to laugh. I still showed up. I still answered texts with, "I'm good." But internally, I hated the way I looked. I hated how awkward I sounded in groups. I hated that I always felt like I was one wrong sentence away from being exposed as not good enough, not attractive enough, not smart enough, not confident enough. And the scary part is, I never said all of that at once. I revealed it slowly. A joke here, a confession there, a late-night conversation where I admitted something I normally would have buried. That was all it took. Because manipulators don't need your whole story in one night. They just need patterns, weak spots, a map, and without realizing it, I handed them one. At first, it felt intimate. They'd say things like, "Wow, I feel like you're the only person who's ever been this real with me." Or, "You can tell me anything. I'd never judge you." And when someone says that at the exact moment you feel unseen by everyone else, it hits hard. You start opening up more. I told them I'd always been insecure about my body. Not dramatically, just casually. I mentioned how I avoided mirrors on bad days, how I compared myself to everyone, how compliments never fully landed because part of me always thought people were lying. They didn't laugh. They didn't dismiss it. They looked at me with this soft, almost wounded expression, like it hurt them to hear me talk about myself that way. That should have felt comforting. Instead, looking back, that was the moment they learned exactly where to place the knife. At first, they used reassurance. That's what makes this kind of manipulation so dangerous. It doesn't begin with attack. It begins with relief. They told me I was beautiful. They told me I was different. They told me I had a kind of depth that other people didn't appreciate. And slowly, I started craving their voice more than my own. That's one of the first signs, by the way. When someone becomes the main source of your self-worth, you're already losing power. Because now, they're not just part of your life. They're becoming the filter through which you see yourself. And once that happened, the shift was small enough to miss. They stopped complimenting me as often. Not completely, just enough to make me notice. Then they'd add little comments. "Are you really wearing that? You look better when you actually try. I mean, you're attractive, but you hide it. You'd be so much more confident if you just fixed a few things." A few things. That phrase stayed in my head because it sounded helpful, not cruel, constructive, not controlling. That's how emotional manipulation often works. It disguises itself as improvement. They make you believe they're helping you become your best self, while quietly teaching you to hate who you already are. And I fell for it. I changed the way I dressed, the way I spoke, the way I posted online. I started asking for their opinion on everything. At the time, I told myself it was normal, that relationships are about influence, that caring what someone thinks means the connection matters. But this wasn't influence. This was conditioning. Because every time I followed their advice, I got warmth, approval, affection. And every time I did something they didn't like, the energy changed. They'd go cold, withdraw, get distant. Suddenly, their replies were shorter. Their tone was flatter. Their attention disappeared just long enough to make me panic. That's called intermittent reinforcement, and it's one of the most powerful psychological tactics there is. It's the same principle that makes gambling addictive. You don't get rewarded every time. You get rewarded unpredictably. So instead of feeling secure, you become obsessed, trying harder, overthinking more, repeating behaviors that once got you approval. That was me. I didn't realize I was being trained. I thought I was fighting for connection. I started replaying every conversation in my head, every facial expression, every pause in their voice, every time they seemed slightly off. Was I too much? Did I say something stupid? Was I being annoying? Did I look bad that day? Did they lose interest because I wasn't enough? Notice what happened there. I stopped questioning their behavior and started blaming myself for my reaction to it. That's where manipulation gets really dark, because the person hurting you slowly becomes the person you run to for relief, and they know it. One night, I remember posting a photo after almost deleting it 5 times. It took me forever to choose one I could tolerate. I knew it sounds small, but if you've ever hated the way you look, you understand how big something like that can feel. They saw it. At first, no response. Then, hours later, they sent, "Interesting choice." That was it. 2 words. But those 2 words ruined my entire night. I stared at that message for 10 straight minutes. Interesting choice? What did that mean? Did I look bad? Did I look desperate? Was it too much? Was it embarrassing? So I asked, and they said, "I don't know. It just doesn't really look like you. Feels like you're trying too hard." That sentence hit every insecurity I had. Not because it was loud, because it was precise. That's what manipulators do when they know you well. They don't attack randomly. They target the insecurity with surgical accuracy. The ones you've already confessed. The ones you've already shown them. The ones you hoped they would protect. And I wish I could tell you I got angry. I didn't. I apologized. That's the part that still bothers me. I apologized for making myself visible. After that, everything escalated. They'd compare me to other people casually. Never enough to seem obvious. Just enough to plant doubt. See? They're naturally confident. That outfit works on them. They don't overthink everything. Over time, I started competing with people who didn't even know I was in a competition. I became hyper-aware of myself, how I sat, how I laughed, how quickly I texted back, whether I seemed needy, whether I seemed boring, whether I was becoming too easy to leave. And the worst part? Sometimes they'd switch back. They'd hold my face and tell me I was the only person who really understood them. They'd say I was beautiful when I wasn't trying. They'd act jealous, protective, intense. So every time I thought, maybe this is unhealthy, they gave me just enough affection to restart hope. That's how the cycle survives. Confusion, pain, relief, repeat. And the human mind gets addicted to the relief, not the love. The relief. There's a difference. Love makes you feel safe. Manipulation makes you feel unstable, then convinces you that stability can only come from them. It took me way too long to understand that. The breaking point came from something so small, most people would probably miss it. We were talking late one night, and I mentioned an opportunity I was excited about. Nothing huge, just something that mattered to me. A chance to do something I'd wanted for a while. Instead of being happy, they laughed softly and said, "You? Really?" I smiled like it was a joke. They kept going. "I'm just being honest. You get insecure too fast. You overthink too much. You'd probably fall apart under pressure." And there it was. Not concern, not honesty. A summary of every fear I had ever told them. They weren't seeing me. They were reciting my wounds back to me. That's when something shifted in my head, because for the first time, I stopped hearing their words as truth and started hearing them as strategy. All those vulnerable conversations, all those moments I thought were building intimacy, all those confessions I made because I trusted them. They hadn't just remembered them, they had stored them, used them, tested them. And every time they needed control, they reached into that collection and pulled out exactly what would weaken me fastest. That's the real horror of it. They didn't create my insecurities. They weaponized them. And that's why this kind of manipulation is so effective. Because when someone attacks you using your own private fears, it doesn't feel like abuse at first. It feels like confirmation. You think, they said I'm too sensitive. Maybe I am. They said I'm not confident enough. Maybe that's true. They said nobody would deal with me the way they do. Maybe I should be grateful. That's the trap. They don't need to invent lies if they can sit inside the doubts you already have. From there, they just amplify them. That's why insecure people are so vulnerable to manipulative dynamics. Not because they're weak, because they're easier to destabilize. If you already question your worth, all a manipulator has to do is control the evidence. A compliment here, a criticism there, a comparison, a withdrawal, a little disappointment in their voice. Soon, your entire identity starts, reacting to them like a nervous system reacting to pain. I wish I could say I left immediately after that realization. I didn't. Awareness is not always escape. Sometimes you see the game clearly and still feel emotionally trapped inside it. That's another thing people don't understand. Leaving a manipulative person isn't just about distance. It's about detox. Because by then, they're living in your head. Even when they're quiet, you hear them. You hear their judgment when you get dressed, their criticism when you speak, their doubt when you try something new, their voice when you look in the mirror. So, yes, eventually I pulled away. But first, I had to go through this brutal phase where I realized I didn't even know which thoughts were mine anymore. Did I actually dislike those parts of myself? Or had I just heard their opinion so many times, it became my inner voice? That question haunted me, and honestly, it still does sometimes. But here's what I know now. The right person does not study your pain to gain leverage. They do not memorize your insecurities so they can manage your behavior. They do not make you feel small, then act like the only safe place left in the room. That's not love. That's psychological control. And one of the clearest signs of manipulation is this. You feel less like yourself the longer you stay. Not calmer. Not stronger. Not more understood. Smaller. More confused. More self-conscious. More dependent on their approval. That's what happened to me. They found the cracks I was already trying to hide. And instead of helping me heal them, they pressed on them until I started breaking in the exact shape they needed. So if someone in your life makes you feel like you have to earn basic affection by becoming less and less yourself, pay attention. If they praise you when you obey, but punish you when you act independently, pay attention. If your deepest insecurities keep showing up in arguments, jokes, or moments when they want control, pay attention. Because by the time you realize what they're doing, you may already be asking them for permission to trust your own mind. And that is a terrifying place to be. I got out. But the hardest part wasn't leaving them. The hardest part was rebuilding the parts of me that believed they were right. That took longer. That took silence, distance, honest reflection, and the painful process of realizing that some of the things I thought were my flaws were just injuries someone kept reopening. So no, this story isn't really about insecurity. It's about what happens when someone learns your wounds and decides to turn them into handles. And if that sounds familiar to you, I need you to hear this clearly. Your insecurity is not an invitation. Your vulnerability is not a weapon for someone else to use. And the fact that someone exploited your pain does not mean you deserved it. It means they saw something human in you and chose to be cruel with it. That says everything about them, not you. If this story felt a little too familiar, comment, "I see it now," and subscribe, because the most dangerous manipulation is the kind that feels personal before it feels harmful.